مولانا for you
بارك
to
الله فيكم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أسعد الخلق وخاتم الرسل محمد صلى الله عليه وآله، ورضي الله عن المهاجرين والأنصار ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. ثم أما بعد. I will give some reflections today rather than a lecture. The reflections are about what does it take for an idea to come to your mind, especially an idea about the Quran. Like, what is the process through which something pops in your mind as a new idea about the Quran? I think that this is not the systematic follow of the 5 steps of the methodology that we presented to you in the Maqasid Institute, and many of you got trained for. I don't think that following those 5 steps would necessarily bring you to a conclusion of the 5th step, which is the higher theories and principles of the Quran. If you follow these systematically, you might not reach the principles of the Quran. And I don't think that the 7 elements and studying them will necessarily bring a new idea to your mind. If you are reading the Quran as a psychologist or a military scientist or a management scientist or political scientist, or any of your profession, mashallah, we have all sorts of professions, you don't have to come up necessarily with an idea because you're analyzing the 7 elements, even though they are means that I personally went through in my journey. And I don't think that it is the wiring of the brain. You see, the idea from neuroscience that the brain wires certain elements and ideas emerge from that network of wiring and stuff, and the whole is bigger than the sum of the parts, and the systematic approaches to neuroscience. I don't think that this is what generates a new idea about the Quran. The fahm that Imam Ali radiallahu anhu talked about, إِلَّا فَهْمًا أُوتِيهِ رَجُلٌ فِي كِتَابِ اللَّهِ. He's saying that maybe one person will come after us and will understand something that Allah will give him in the book of Allah. So I take from this that what makes the idea come to your mind is a gift from Allah, because the idea comes in your heart, really, not in your mind. Our aql is here. لَهُمْ قُلُوبٌ لَا يَعْقِلُونَ لَا يَفْقَهُونَ بِهَا, the fiqh, which is the deep understanding that we're looking for here, and the aql, and the tadhakkur, and the basar, even the view and the vision. The Quran is saying it's here in the heart. And for us not to have any doubt, Allah said, Al-qulubu allati fi as-sudur, the heart in the chest. So it is here. It's not exactly the muscle, but it's here. That is what brings an idea from the ayah. بل هو آيات بينات في صدور الذين أوتوا العلم. They are signs, ayat, in the chests of those who have knowledge. 7 years ago, when I started this last trip with the Quran, that was about 7 years ago now, I remember reading and not going anywhere. I decided to study the Quran, but I started to read, and it's not taking me in any new direction. I memorized the Quran, like I started my memorization when I was a kid, like now 50 years ago. And then it took me a few years. So I've been memorizing that Quran for half a century. But when I started to read, I could not see anything new. I could see the fiqh that I learned, fiqh al-Shafi'iyya, and then fiqh al-Muqaran. I could see some of the ahadith that I studied. I could see some of the fatawa. I could see some of the history. I could remember, oh, this verse is linked to this poem, Arabic poem, or this from the seerah, or I remember when I memorized that surah, I was in such and such place. but I did not get any new idea. And I thought that I have a crisis because I decided to memorize the Quran. I took some time off from regular teaching and stuff at that time. I remember 2016. And I sat in my office and I'm lost, kind of thing. Like, where do I go? I studied to decide. I decided to study, but I'm not going anywhere. And from my experience, I think it's like the Sufis when they tell you, keep knocking on the door until the door opens. I think that keep knocking on the door is to keep reading and to keep questioning and to read more and to listen and to reflect. I think there is a wisdom in the memorization of the Quran culture that we have in Islam, or as Muslim societies, we memorize the Quran. People are non-Muslim are surprised. Oh, you memorize it like cover to cover, like the whole thing? And they don't understand. And I'm asked oftentimes when people introduce me, oh, he memorized the Quran. And a Muslim would come up to me and say, like, why? Why did you have to memorize the whole book? I think part of the wisdom behind the memorization, في صدور الذين أوتوا العلم, not in في صحف الذين, they're not in the scripts of the people of knowledge. The Quran is in the hearts, in the chest. I think one of the wisdoms is the repetition, because every time you repeat, something comes up. It's not necessarily, again, a neuron in the brain, and it is not necessarily a chart on X mind or whatever that you put on a screen, but it's something that lightens up somehow. And part of what helped me with my journey as well, I'm just sharing with you, is the listening to the Quran, and especially listening to people who recite it slowly, whatever your favorite reader is, and reading. I am more inclined to the Egyptian school of Muhammad Rifat and Minshawi. And when I was a kid, I remember, or a teenager, I remember listening to Sheikh Abdul Basit and Al-Hussein and the Masjid Al-Hussein in Cairo and Tablawi and these people. And they take you, because they recite very slowly. وَإِذَا قُرِئَ الْقُرْآنُ فَاسْتَمِعُوا لَهُ وَأَنصِتُوا لَعَلَّكُمْ تُرْحَمُونَ. If the Quran is read, then listen and pay attention. Maybe you will be, maybe mercy will come to you. Maybe Allah will show His mercy. And that's this gift that I'm telling you. Sometimes you get an idea by just listening to the Quran, or because you memorize it by reading it over and over, reading the ayah, and then the ayah opens something up for you. And every time you read the ayah, perhaps it will open a different idea if you think about it. I think it's part of the reason why the Prophet ﷺ was ordered to do Qiyamul Layl every night, was a required ibadah from him. And I think that's the reason why at the beginning of the Quran, the companions, the Sahaba, were ordered to pray half of the night and 1/3 of the night, and stand and just repeat. And remember, that was in Mecca. There was not so much Quran at that time, only a few surahs. Surah Al-Muzammil, Muddathir. Muzammil is after like 4 or 5 surahs. So they stand all night and read those 5 surahs. اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق والضحى والشرح ألم نشرح لك صدرك. And this, like very few at that time, تبت يدا أبي لهب وتب. Some of the qisar al-suwar, really, they did not have the whole big surahs, سبع الطوال, the 7 long ones, except for Al-An'am, were in Medina, really. You know, of course, Al-Anfal was after Badr, and A'raf after Uhud, after Tabuk, and Al-Ma'idah was at the end, and Al-Baqarah in the beginning of Medina, and Al-Imran with the Najran people, and so forth. You know, so when you look at An'am al-A'raf, yeah, that is Mecca. So they didn't have much to read, just Surah Al-An'am perhaps, and then Surah Al-A'raf. But they, because of the repetition and knocking on the door repeatedly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala started to open something. I remember also getting into some sort of a block at some point and decided to go Fami Bishawq, or reading those 7 parts that we read over this program, to read it every week, actually. I never did that before. I used to memorize and recite in a different pattern based on the 30 juz and so forth, or sometimes much slower than that. But when I started to read those 7 parts over a week, and every week I finished the Quran, things started to open up out of nowhere, because you see, you start to be busy with it. You know, you sleep at night and you start to dream about what you read. And it becomes quite interesting, because this is not an algorithm. We're not teaching like an objective curriculum here. This is just a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for those who have knowledge in their chests. And when you read more and when you listen and you enjoy your listening, because the reader's voice is very nice and trying to give you the meaning, and when you memorize and when you pray with it, longer prayers sometimes, and so forth, you sit in a masjid and read, that will open ideas for you. But it's a journey, as we heard from the doctora. It takes years. It's a journey that takes years for you to have new ideas and you know, a revelation. For the sake of this exercise, just of course, yeah, give us reflections and we talk. But I just wanted to share this, that this is not an algorithm and this is not a mechanical, systematic kind of curriculum. It is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opens for you, that we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to continue to gift us with, all of us. And it's something that when you knock on the door, I get stuck sometimes with some of the ayat. Some of you might know that I write on the Quran these days. I get stuck with an ayah and I stand in front of the ayah and, okay, where do I go with the ayah? And then I repeat the ayah, or I put the ayah in my ears from one of my favorite readers and keep listening to it. And then the ayah opens up with a meaning, like something comes to my mind. Oh, that ayah actually is linked to this. How does the idea come to the mind? I have no idea. Or I'm pointing here, it's here actually. How does it come? And how come you get stuck? You have what we call in English a writer's block for a few hours or a day or two. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us. And then how do you move forward? It's a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I think that is part of this journey, that an advice for myself and you, that this is not a mechanical exercise. This is not a graduate studies program or a course with a particular textbook, but rather a journey. And the more you hold on to this book, وَالَّذِينَ يُمَسِّكُونَ بِالْكِتَابِ وَأَقَامُوا الصَّلَاةَ إِنَّ لَا نُضِيعُ أَجْرَ الْمُصْلِحِينَ. Those who hold on to the book and they establish the prayers, we will not diminish the reward of the rectifiers or al-muslihin. They become rectifiers. Allah gives them with something. So just for me and you to keep knocking on the door, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of his generosity, he is the best host subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he is the best companion. He will open for you, inshallah, the doors. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us all. Jazakumullah khair. Barakallahu fi.